There we go. Okay, welcome back, everybody. I have completely lost track. I believe we're week 13, um, which is a good sign that we've lost track of how many of these we've done. We've been thrilled to be able to roll out as many as we have, and we're equally thrilled at the participation that we continue to get and the interest from our local coaches. It's great to see many of you back again online. We are thrilled tonight to have with us Mr. Wes Wolfe, assistant coach from the Erie Otters from the OHL, joining us all the way from St. Catharines on the Niagara Peninsula. I will let Wes speak a little bit more to his background and his coaching pedigree. But needless to say, very excited to listen to his topic tonight and to hear what he has to share with us. So, Wes, thank you for joining us. All over to you, sir.
Thank you very much. I guess before I start, I want to make sure I say thanks to Brian and Jeff for having me on. Professional development and continued learning as a coach is something that is near and dear to my heart. Running the Niagara Hockey Coaches Seminar for grassroots level coaches is something I've done the last 4 years. Done a webinar series due to the current global situation. And obviously a longtime supporter of all types of, coaching clinics and seminars like the NHL Coaches Association, the Coaches Site, OHL Coaches Conference. So I think you guys are doing a fantastic thing, providing resources for coaches, not only for the locker place, but to do it for free and give people this opportunity is just tremendous. And love to see positive things coming out of the pandemic. I'm not going to talk much about myself. As Brian mentioned, I'm an assistant coach for the Erie Otters. I've been so for 4 seasons. I was very fortunate my first year in the league to win an OHL championship and get all the way to the Memorial Cup final, where we lost to the Windsor Spitfires. Prior to that, coached Junior B for a couple of years in St. Catharines in the Golden Horseshoe. I was a longtime minor hockey coach in Niagara Falls to AAA, Single A, Select, House League levels. I'm 30 years old, started coaching when I was 16, kind of a career coach. So really don't take for granted the opportunity to give back to grassroots level coaches and other ones who are on the call. Coming from a similar background, I jump at any opportunity and I'm very grateful for that chance. So change of pace. I've done a number of presentations during this pandemic, whether publicly or for private Zoom calls on, systems or skill development, a lot of very hockey-centric topics with video and teaching heavy. When I spoke to Jeff, I really wanted to do something different and talk a little bit more about coaching philosophy and sort of as it relates to hockey. So the topic is W.I.N, an acronym that I like to use for what's important now. And, I guess a good place to start is, right now, where we were forced to pivot. And obviously with the pandemic hitting, it hit us pretty hard having to postpone the season, a lot of teams missing out on playoff runs, and giving us all sort of a chance to step back. But I saw a tweet back in May that really sparked my interest. And that was a question we should be asking during the pandemic, is what don't you miss about playing sports? And how much learning can come from that question? As coaches, as adults, are we vulnerable enough to ask and then listen and deliver based on what we say? So I thought that was, a really poignant question to ask. And, so I decided to text a number of our players and just say, I'd love to know what you guys don't miss. What don't you miss about playing hockey? What don't you miss about being in Erie? The reason why is because, maybe if we ask those questions now, A, we have the opportunity to change, but B, maybe we can recognize the symptoms later on if a guy's body language is off or if, their play is seeing some sort of decline. How can we recognize what's happening? And so really interesting to hear some of the different answers to the question about what don't they miss? And a recurring theme was stress. One player, when hockey's going on, I can't sleep. Right now I'm sleeping great. He actually said he's sleeping better than he ever has. And because of the stress of the game and the stress he puts on himself, he has a hard time sleeping during the season. I don't miss the days hockey felt like a job more than something I loved doing. and there's no escape or room for an outside life. I thought that was really, really interesting to hear that perspective. And then the pressure, the added pressure that players put on themselves. I don't miss the haters and pessimistic outsiders. It's fun to prove them wrong, but when you hear people who have little to no knowledge doubting you or the team, it's hard, especially when you're going through a slump. Or you messed up. The coach should be able to tell through your body language, yet they yell excessively, and it can be a detriment to your confidence rather than a wake-up call, and promotes negative energy. And then just some of the other themes that came up, being away from family and friends. Sometimes it feels like I don't want to be there because there's no getaway. The travel's grueling, the schedule, 3-and-3s, missing whether it's, holidays or birthday parties, not having a social life, injuries, and then the last part was, geez, that's a tough question. I'm the wrong person to ask. I miss it all. And I can't think of anything. I really, really miss, everything. And then the second piece, was I honestly can't even answer that. I'm not a good guy to ask because I just miss it all. Even the crummy parts like bus rides, the way I've been looking at it is after it's all over, what will I say? I don't think there's anything that I won't miss. And so, when you take a step back as a coach, some of those things are things that are outside of our control, but some of those things are inside our control. And as I mentioned at the outset, if we can take the opportunity now as we're not playing and we're not, how can you reassess the environment that we create for our players? And kind of building on the quote that last player actually mentioned about looking back on his OHL career and not wanting to take it for granted. This was something obviously that's an old image. I saw it recirculate on social media about the harsh reality of the odds of making it to the next level. Only 0.7% are drafted into the major junior level, and 0.2% to the NHL, and then 0.025% of players that play minor hockey make an NHL career. Well, we all sort of know those things, and it's not much different. They've already beat the odds to play in the Ontario Hockey League. I took a look at the 2001 age group, and there were 7,500 players roughly eligible for the OHL draft. 1,500 of them, were AAA players. Only 300 of those players were drafted, and then 120 players have played one game, which is only 1.6% of players in that age group eligible. So the question is, what is the goal and what should the goal be? Not only for major junior coaches or college coaches or junior A, but for grassroots level coaches, what is the goal? Is it making a playing career? Or is it more than that? One of the things that I've come to learn is that what you focus on the most grows the most. So if you're an outcome-focused coach, your players are going to be focused on outcomes. And usually that starts to show itself in ugly ways, whether it's visible frustration, banging your stick when things don't go your way, slamming gates. Players that show bad behavior, oftentimes it's because their focus is on the wrong things. And when your focus is purely outcome driven, you end up in a place that, continues to grow frustration. And the player who mentioned, not sleeping well during the season, there are a number of things that can contribute to that, anxiety being one of them, stress, pressure. And oftentimes it's not allowing outcomes to let go. So something that we try to talk about is focusing on the root, not the fruit. And the root is, the process that you put into being a hockey player. But beyond that, being a person first, you're a human being, not a human doing, is something I also say often. And, as coaches, we're not just coaching hockey skills. We're not just coaching hockey players. We're coaching people. And gone are the days of transactional leadership where you look to, push buttons or find trigger points to intimidate your players to be the best version of themselves. You need to transform and have a relationship that inspires people to be their best. And so hockey skills are great, and hockey skills are certainly more important than hockey status. If you're coaching single A, it's great to focus on skill development. The letters on your jacket don't matter. The status doesn't matter. But I think even at the junior level and the professional level, life skills are far more important, than hockey skills. And when we look at the fruit, if anyone follows me on social media, being good people first is something that we stress in our organization. It's a foundational pillar of the Erie Otters organization. The fruit is the things that you see here. And I'm really proud of some of these player-driven initiatives. In the top left corner, our captain, Jack Duff, initiated a program with Big Brothers, Big Sisters to mentor players and invite them to home games with their families. Bottom left corner, Brendan Hoffman, during the pandemic, did a GoFundMe for ALS awareness and raised over $2,000. Our associate coach, BJ Adams, and his wife had a GoFundMe that donated over 300 meals for frontline healthcare workers. The bottom right corner, Nolan Lalonde, one of our recent draft picks, was just profiled on the Hockey Canada website about his special friendship that he has with a local man with Down syndrome and sort of his mentorship role and friendship in that community. And then, our whole organization participating in a community 3K that involved players and coaches and business staff. And so that's the fruit. When I say focus on the root, I believe that wasn't a coincidence that recently all these things have started to come to light. For us, the root begins with character development. And, if you want to truly be transformational and you want to transform your people, you need to immerse them in an environment where you are fostering all of those qualities. And so for us, and for coaches out there looking to, immerse their players in that type of environment, I have some recommendations. We have a program that's called Route 66 that we've created that is very intense in character development. Our players participate in weekly modules, with educational videos and assignments in different areas of character development, whether it's resiliency or sleep, rest, and recovery, self-awareness, a whole curriculum of character development that our players are required to go through, and they submit assignments and we grade them. And then we go on Zoom every week with a member of our alumni who give up their time to talk to our players about their experience with that topic. And it's been really powerful to see the engagement and the vulnerability of our athletes with each other to open up about some of the challenges that they face. And that's all done via Google Classroom and Zoom. And when I talk about vulnerability, another recommendation is something we've done for the past several years called Hero Highlight Fear, where our players will each get up in front of the team and present who their hero is and why, a highlight from their life that's not hockey related, and then what their deepest fear is. And as many of you know, dealing with young athletes, male and female, whether they're teenaged or younger, it's a challenge to have them be vulnerable. And I'm going to get to that later, but opening up and truly being yourself is something that is very difficult to extract from your athletes. And so when you can immerse them in that environment, it's a really powerful tool. And I think we've seen breaking down walls within teammates and the ability to, embrace some differences and accept sort of learning new things about your teammates. It's a really powerful way to do things. And then the last part, when you put an emphasis on character throughout the year, whether it's, school appearances, as you see in some of the photos, the Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, the Erie Mighty Otters sled hockey team, our players are consistently and frequently exposed to experiences outside of hockey that prepare them for life after the game. And so, I kind of challenge you to look at your own program and ask some of those difficult questions to your players and to yourself, and listen carefully to the answers, and understand that not everyone's needs are the same. Everyone's at a different juncture in their life, and there are certain areas of their character that, you may need to develop more than others. And not everyone's path is the same, and Fun and Love First is a great place to start. And so when I talk about not everyone's path being the same, I thought I'd share a neat little story. The player circled in green, this is an article from 2008 about the Humberview Huskies Adam A team that was in the Toronto Star, a profile of a local team. But the profile was about the captain, Anthony Sorelli, playing on the Humberview Huskies Adam Single A team. And he's a great playmaker, at 10 years of age, shows leadership. He's respectful, attentive. I just thought that was interesting, seeing this article about an Adam Single A player. So fast forward to 2014, and Anthony was a free agent invite to the Oshawa Generals, 1997 birth. Was fortunate to attend training camp as a free agent and wowed everybody at camp. They signed him as a free agent. At the end of the season, he scored the game-winning goal in overtime to win the Memorial Cup. Was drafted by the Tampa Bay Lightning. He was traded to us at the Erie Otters. So I was really fortunate to coach Anthony. Scored the overtime winning goal in the OHL championship for us. Went on to some success his first year pro with Syracuse Crunch. Finished the year in Tampa Bay. Played on the World Junior team. And he was almost a finalist for the Selke Trophy this year. And I'm sure he's going to be a perennial candidate, for the next decade. Same training camp, 2014. I coached midget AAA that year. And a player that you probably haven't heard of is Brady Cranwell. He was the same position, free agent, 97 birth forward. Him and Anthony were 2 of 3 invites that year to basically compete for the same spot. Brady was a tremendous minor midget AAA player, broke his wrists, wasn't drafted, played on our midget AAA team, was almost a 2-point-a-game player. Was the last cut. Him and Anthony were actually competing for the last spot. I still remember the phone call. He was there on the last day. And so the margin was razor thin at that time. He almost won out on that spot. And when you think, 6 years later, I look at Brady's hockey career immediately following that midget AAA season. He played a season of Junior B, was just under a point-a-game player. Tried out Tier 2 Junior A for 8 games and realized, he had other priorities in his life. And so he played 4 seasons with the Grimsby Peach Kings Junior C hockey team in his hometown. Is one of the all-time leading scorers for their organization. As you see, had deep playoff runs, won their league championship 4 times, competed for a provincial championship once. As I reflect, I think it's important for us to evaluate as coaches how we define success and what success looks like. And as I put this presentation together, I thought it was a great time to touch back with Brady and his dad, because, what success looks like for me as a coach is not the success story that we hear about. When I go back to the priorities, what is the goal and what should the goal be? The goal is to develop great people. And one of the things that we talked about, Brady's dad mentioned that he learned, despite maybe the lack of what we call conventional success in hockey, that he didn't play professionally, he can look back fondly and proudly on his career and the relationships that he developed, the friends he made. But then on top of that, the perseverance that he learned, the preparation of being an elite athlete, competing for a job, immediately following his playing career, he started coaching Pee Wee Single A himself in his hometown, giving back in his community. A year ago, I ran a 10K and he was handing out water on the side of the race, and then dealing with adversity, And so Brady is now graduated from post-secondary education and has a contract with the government with the MTO. And we had a great conversation, and I told him how proud of him I was, just as an athlete, but even more so as a person, that the man he's become. And that's really the job of us as coaches. The influence that we have is focusing on the root. And the root of all of our players, all of our athletes, is that they are people. And so those life skills are far more important than any hockey skill you will ever teach to any of your players. And I thought this was a really interesting quote from an article that I saw in the Toronto Star. It's, the trick is overcoming the system that has produced so many great players. McDavid is a mainstream success story, as are most #1 picks. They flash their talent and drive early. They find their ways to elite minor hockey teams. They spend their entire childhoods playing before a dazzled hockey community, but it's not an inclusive system. And some kids don't grow soon enough. Their families may not believe in training year round. They may not afford the additional time that it takes and the training best young players need. And when we talk about the Sorellis, even though that's not maybe the mainstream success story, he played single A hockey until Bantam. It's still a mainstream story when you look at it. At the end of the day, a very small margin, as we talked about, less than 1% will even get to the major junior level. Playing on a world junior team, that's the mainstream. But the predominant number of our athletes are going to stop playing hockey at some point. And even the ones who make it to the next level, your career ends at some point. And so what are you teaching? What are you giving your players? What tools are you arming them with? For when that inevitable end happens. Now, fortunately, Anthony is, again, a true success story in every sense of the word himself. Respectful young man, humble roots, works hard, great character, very coachable, all those character traits that you're looking for. And obviously he's fortunate to have the level of success that he's had professional hockey playing. But I told Brady this, and I'm just as proud of him and view him as just as much of a success story because of the life that he's living. Changing pace a little bit, I wanted to talk about a couple of COVID conclusions. And these are things that, two things that I call more affirmations based on all of the professional development that's been made available, things that I probably already felt, but have more affirmation on now. And that's number one, the entourage. And I think every coach on this call can probably relate to this, but we no longer coach just teams and players. It's a group of individual collectivists. So if our athlete's the one in the middle, with the orange shirt, they have their own team, right? You have a power skating coach, you have a skills coach, you have a nutritionist, you have an agent, you have a momager, you have a cousin's friend who has a guy. There's so much distortion in the message that, you have teams within your team. So the entourage is something we have to deal with. And then the second thing is blurred lines. And I think this is sort of a byproduct of that entourage, but modern coaching requires far more versatility and fluidity than ever before. Not only do we need to understand and be well-versed in the language of coaching, but we also need to understand analytics and skill development and goaltending. And then finally, our athletes, this generation, are probably the most worldly, diverse, and interested in social justice and causes than any other generation before them because of the access to the global information that they have. And so as a coach, that line is now blurred because they're well versed in all of these areas and they expect you to be as well. And that's part of the job. And so those blurred lines, lead to us having to be far more versed, far more understanding, and far more educated on a number of different areas. And so the acronym for what's important now, I thought it was important to look at what's happening right now. What's important now is an important question. Well, what's happening right now are sort of these 5 areas, that have come to the forefront since the beginning of the pandemic. And that's more attention to racism, sexism, and the experience that women are having in sports and in society, abuse and mental health, looking at, the hazing allegations and some of the, videos Eric Guest has put out, the lawsuit with Dan Carcillo, and then homophobia, which is still ever present. And so I think one of the prevailing themes that I still hear sometimes at the arena and I still see on social media is that hockey culture is under attack. And I cross that out because, when we look at hockey culture as a whole, as a coach and as a member of hockey culture and hockey society, I think no one can doubt that the sport is insular. For the most part, especially at the elite levels, our players come from similar socioeconomic backgrounds and become a product of their environment. And a number of unconscious biases can and do exist. And so hockey culture is built around conformity. And I can say this from experience, having played it my entire life, that oftentimes when you're in a locker room, you find yourself conforming. You hear the top 3 areas of discussion in most men's locker rooms are often girls and partying and sports. And unfortunately, all of our players have interests outside of those areas, but they conform oftentimes to that area of discussion, even if it makes them uncomfortable, because that's the way to fit in. And it can be a vicious cycle of perpetuation, whether whether it is hazing or whether it is some of those other areas like sexism or racism. Oftentimes, players will conform to fit into the group. And so I think it's really important as a coach to set the tone and break down some of these barriers. So number one is recognizing and acknowledging our own unconscious biases, whatever they are. And I think, I'm no expert in this area. I try to educate myself more and more and learn about these issues, but recognizing and acknowledging, maybe even participation in the past and something that you may not be proud of, whether it is language or action. And you can't control the past, but you can control your future. And educating and recognizing and acknowledging some of the biases that may exist as a byproduct of our environment. And then addressing the issues. And I think most importantly, humanizing them. And I have my own personal anecdote. I go to the cottage every year with my friends, all of whom were hockey players, AAA level or junior that I played with growing up. And one of my friends used, a word that we now know is unacceptable to use. And it wasn't in a harmful context. It was simply to describe something in a manner that it didn't really apply to. And so, I confronted it, and I think, humanizing the terms is often something that most people can't do and put into context. When you use a word that refers to a group of people to explain, maybe you have more vocabulary to more accurately describe what you're talking about. Maybe it's ridiculous, or maybe it's silly, or, there are lots of words we can use to describe. When you put a human on the term that you're using, it humanizes the issue. And I think it really helps people realize that the language they use can be harmful and powerful. And then, education, reform, and atonement is a really important piece. When you look at homophobia and abuse, mental health, racism, sexism, there's still a stigma attached to talking about some of these things because we don't have enough education. And so as a coach, you need to be more than just a hockey coach. You're a leader, you are a trendsetter, and you are a role model for your players. And so you need to educate yourself, but then provide opportunities for your players to be immersed in an environment where those educational resources are made available to them. And, starting by calling things out and holding people accountable for their behavior and language is an important piece to being a successful coach in 2020. And then I think celebrating differences. And finally, fostering an environment that embraces honesty, vulnerability, and inclusion. And I talked about vulnerability a lot already, but I think it's so important that, we provide an environment that's welcoming to our players to be who they are. I think, as I mentioned, conforming to an environment that's central to, themes that are macho or expected of a hockey player, isn't a healthy environment. All it does is perpetuate the cycle. If you can celebrate, the differences in people, I talk about the hero highlight fear. One of the things that I learned was that, there are so many things about our players that we may not know. You're just scratching the surface. We had a player who started his own clothing line. We learned that one was a national level track and field athlete. We learned about the heroes of some of our players, whether it was siblings or parents or grandparents, or, it could be a celebrity, but it can often be an emotional experience. When you hear about those things, you realize that even though we do come from similar socioeconomic backgrounds, oftentimes, some of us don't. And some people have interests outside of hockey. They might be reading or music or, education. There are all kinds of things that make us different, and celebrating them, acknowledging them, and fostering an environment where that's welcomed will go a long way to getting the most out of your players. And I think when we talk about transactional leadership versus transformational leadership, when we start to do these things, that's when the culture will truly transform. And you want to get the most out of your people by inspiring them instead of intimidating them. And I think hockey can be a really intimidating environment still. We talked about the game is changing. Obviously, a lot of these things are coming to the forefront, but I guess reeling it back into a hockey context, I saw this quote from Kyle Dubas about the emphasis being, not getting caught up in the prototypical way of looking at players. Let's try not to, or let's dig deep and not pigeonhole into looking into one specific player. So I thought, last thing I'd sort of share is the game is changing from obviously an off-ice standpoint, as we covered, but an on-ice standpoint. So in 2016, there were 34 players drafted in the OHL who were 6'3" or taller. This past draft 3 months ago, there were 10 players in the entire draft who were 6'3" or taller. And I think a lot of that is the emphasis on putting a premium on skill development. As a coach, like I said, the lines are blurred now. We're not just looking for the big players. We're not just looking for, ones who can, fit a system. But I think putting a premium on skill and not pigeonholing our view on what a hockey player looks like is really important. And that kind of extends to size or gender or race. There are endless, differences that create a person. And as I mentioned at the beginning, I think, the essence of this presentation is that we want to be transformational coaches. And that is by being human beings, not humans doing. And, I think how to win, what's important now is 4 fundamental pillars, and that's providing your athletes with unconditional love. I think you can't be a successful coach. You can't expect to extract or inspire, a better word, your athletes to be their best if you don't love them. And you can't win without unconditional support of your athletes. People will, they will go through things in their lives, whether it's breaking up with a partner or if it's, having a bad day at school, if it's trouble at home. As an athlete, people will often turn to their sport for an escape. And so as a leader and as a coach, providing that unconditional support, that even when they're having a bad day and their performance isn't there, we're not focused on the outcome. We're focused on the process and providing that unconditional support, fostering that environment for our athletes to be successful is paramount. And by far, a more accurate depiction of what success looks like. Unconditional encouragement, and that goes hand in hand with support, but failure is a fundamental piece to success. You can't succeed without failing, and encouraging our athletes to go through that and recognizing that adversity is an opportunity in disguise. On our team Zoom call last night, Chris Campoli came on, former Erie Otter, who's now with the NHLPA. And he faced a lot of adversity in his career. He touched on not getting drafted in the NHL 2 years in a row, being drafted as a 19-year-old, as a 7th round pick, fighting his way from the AHL to the NHL. That adversity, created more opportunity because of his mindset. And then, having an open mind about what success looks like. A lot of times our athletes have a specific vision in mind about what their path looks like. I know at our level, every player who comes into camp expects to make it as a 16-year-old or as a 17-year-old and make an immediate impact. And, we have our first sit-down meetings and they say, I don't just want to be there, I want to contribute. And it's very seldom does the path actually appear the same as the way that you envisioned it. And so having an open mind about diverging from the path and recognizing that adversity is creating an opportunity in another area. And if we can encourage our athletes to embrace adversity, to embrace divergence, to embrace the different path, it will lead to success in ways maybe we didn't expect. And then finally, perspective and, redefining what success is. And I've been guilty of this in my career. We all love to celebrate the on-ice successes of our athletes. We love to talk about the championships, as I did at the beginning of this presentation. We love to talk about, the athlete that we coached in Pee Wee who, is in the AHL, one step away from the NHL. We love to talk about, those teams that had 5 OHL draft picks and, won the Marlies tournament. That's fantastic, but it doesn't provide perspective on what's most important. And the most important thing is that we are developing people first. And oftentimes, even on the ice, the things that will short circuit an athlete's career are character flaws or the inability to overcome challenges that they face. And if you as a coach can provide an environment where your athletes can develop as people, and you can maintain perspective on not just what the outcomes are, but the process along the way, then you will be a transformational coach and find it far more rewarding, than any win can ever be. I'm serially addicted to winning. Anyone who knows me knows I'm a very competitive person. Doesn't matter if I'm playing ping pong, Monopoly, singing karaoke. I want to be the best. I want to win. I try to turn everything into a competition, and that's healthy. But managing your expectations and having perspective about life is something that I continue to try and work at. And so that's really all I have to share today about what I believe is how to win and focus on what's important now. So I would love to open the discussion to any questions, whether it's about this topic or if it is, more hockey related. I'm happy to share. But thank you very much for having me on. And I hope I didn't sound too much like I was preaching to anybody, but I thought it was something that I've given a lot of consideration to, and is something I think we should all revisit, is our philosophy on coaching.
Wes, thanks so much. I was really taken by your presentation. I thought it was very powerful. I do a lot of reading for coaches that I work with in clinics. I always talk about how much I read, and the more I read about coaching, the more you hear about it's about relationship building. Fundamentally, being a coach is about building relationships, and sort of the gist of your whole presentation was all about that, about building relationships with the person, not always about the X's and O's and the tactics and the systems. And I'm guilty like any other coach. We tend to get really hung up on that side of coaching, and sometimes too much, and at the cost of what is really important, and it's that human development, that relationship building, all the other things that go in to our role and to our day-to-day. So I loved it. Some great messages there. We've got some questions coming in. I'm going to open up. I'm going to call on guys to open up their unmute their mics and let them ask their questions. So we'll start with Ed. Ed, if you want to unmute and fire your question off to Wes, get things rolling.
Sure. Hey, Wes, how's it going?
Good. What's happening?
Good. Not much. I love the term momager. I'm not sure if guys caught that, but that was awesome. Love it. I sent this out to Brian. Maybe it's such a long-winded question, more of a comment than a question. But I know you and I discussed a couple years ago at CAM the concept of the heroes highlights and we tried it that year, and it is incredibly powerful. I'm just kind of supporting what you talked about. It was incredibly powerful. The level of comfort it opened up, it made, like, everyone's different. All the players are different with how much they want to open up. But man, oh man, some of the stuff when players really open up, it really created a bond with that team. I've never seen before. And I kind of joked to Brian saying, you got to be prepared for a lot of tears, because some things that some of the players say is really, really touching. And that to me is huge for building a team bonding. And just wanted to support what you said there, just to give an example of that. I've tried it and it really does work. My question is, based on this, what are your thoughts or what do you guys do for mindset performance training?
We first and foremost, the tiers, it kind of goes against everything you believe about I guess the macho elite athlete. I know the group that you coach, but for 16 to 20-year-old men, you wouldn't believe a lot of tiers with our group. Same thing, guy. The guys get emotional. So it can be a very powerful thing. As far as the mindset training, it's sort of two-pronged. One is we have a sports psychologist who is a part of our staff that comes to address the group on a bi-weekly basis to cover a number of different topics. Again, it could be anything from breathing techniques to dealing with adversity, but they also have the opportunity to schedule one-on-ones. The second piece is the Google Classroom that I mentioned. A lot of the character development there focuses on mental preparation, visualization. There are a lot of different subjects in that curriculum that we cover. And I guess the last piece, specifically, I think my role on the staff is, being the youngest coach, is having some more personal relationships on that level. And a lot of players have found success in learning through others' experiences. So, we do a lot of recommended reading. John Gordon is a personal favorite. Our whole team read The Hard Hat, 21 Great Ways to be a Teammate. Another one is Pound the Stone by Joshua Medcalf. Our players really seem to like that book. And I know that, just this past week, actually, we registered our captains to participate in a workshop with John Gordon. It was a 2-hour workshop in the middle of a day on Wednesday. So our captains participated on that and had some notes, and we had them or the plan is to have them present back to the team on what they learned from that. So there's a lot of different things that we do, but I think learning from others' experiences and then our team psychologist is obviously a big part of that.
Great stuff. We have another question here from JB Ryan. JB is a coach in our U18 AAA league here. I told him I'd let him unmute his mic, but he just informed me that he has a crying baby on his hands. So he said you should probably ask the question. He's interested in knowing if you could suggest some areas where midget coaches can help better prepare players for your level of play. So kids that want to move on to the OHL, what are some things that midget coaches can or should be doing to, get them ready on these, these win types of concepts?
Well, I think a lot comes from habit development, and this kind of is relevant on and off the ice. So I guess I'll start with on the ice because obviously we all want to have successful athletes on the ice too. When I talk about habits, I think there's a shift happening in the game where the systems approach is slowly changing to a style of play approach. And I think there's way less rigidity in how coaches are structuring their teams. What's central to style of play are details and habits. And I found in my 4 years in Erie, one of the things that the young players struggle to get up to speed with quickly are habits and attention to detail. It's little things like stopping on the puck, having their stick position, angling, on ice habits like stopping at the net off of drills. I'm doing skill development now, and that's something that I find myself, harping on a lot is holding players accountable to just develop a good habit now. As a Bantam player, stop at the net because in a game, that's what you're going to do, not drift into a corner. If you don't do it in practice, you won't do it in a game. So on the ice, preparing athletes, don't get me wrong, there are lots of systems. There's a lot to think about, but I think habits and details is a great place to start. Off the ice, again, I think immersion into a culture that promotes, community involvement. I know our player schedule is full. They wake up at 6:30, the high school kids, they take the bus to school. They're there all morning until noon. They have an hour for lunch. They come to the rink. They have an individual video meeting. Maybe there's team video. They go on the ice at 2:00. Then they have their mandatory team workout, and then they have homework. And oftentimes, there's community involvement. So things like time management, things like having your players keep journals, maybe start practicing some visualization or bringing in a psychologist, a local student maybe who's covering that. And then trying to have community initiatives. I think that's something. I know that I think it's Chevrolet is partnered with Hockey Canada to promote the Good Deeds Cup. But I think, one of the things is you can expose your players to experiences outside of that insular hockey culture. It will help them immerse into an environment down the road where maybe they're leaving home. They have life experience outside of just being a hockey player, and so they can deal with, working with the media or going to a community appearance at a school. So kind of, providing them with the opportunity to do those things now. The best way to learn is to do. So I would say those are some good things to do.
Great stuff. Bob Gould. Bob, are you still on the line? Would you like to unmute and fire your question to Wes?
Yeah, I'm still here, Brian.
Hey, buddy.
Hey, Wes, great presentation. I'm going to be honest with you. I've been on every single one of these, and it's definitely my favorite one by far. I agree the game is changing, and for the most part, probably off the ice. Life skills is probably the most important one for me. I work in a junior program in our association here, and it's all about our culture, and I've been working on it for 3 seasons now. I'm excited to go back for my 4th. We build on character, respect, and discipline. The 3 words I use with them every day. My question, and more of a general question, maybe some thoughts, ideas, or suggestions. Probably the thing I struggle with the most with today's players is the word you've used a few times now, which is accountability. Because of course, without getting into detail, with the elite players today, and not all of them, but sometimes it's not happening at home, so it becomes that much harder to foster it at the rink. So if you could just maybe dive a little deeper into that, I would certainly appreciate it.
Yeah, appreciate the kind words. It sounds like you guys are doing a great job, with your program as well. I think, I kind of said this in the last answer, but the best way to learn is to do. And so you're right. I think a lot of our athletes do struggle with being held accountable. And I think, I think back to one player in particular. I won't say his name, but he slept in twice in his first year for a morning meeting at the rink. And into his second season, it's something that was still happening. I think in my time with the team, he is the only player who's ever slept in and missed a meeting, and it's happened, 4 times. And it starts to become like comical. Guys make light of it. His Secret Santa gift was, this industrial strength alarm clock, and but the problem is, how can you be accountable for yourself? And I think honestly, it's age old, but the best way to send a message is with ice time. Hockey players want to play, and I don't condone benching players at the youth level for long periods of time, especially for things that are outside of their control. Like being late. I mean, a 10-year-old can't drive themselves to the rink, but at the junior level, there are a number of things that are inside our control. All I ask of our athletes is to control what they can, and that's their effort and their attitude. And I guess within effort is action, but those 2 things are all that's in their control. And if they start to lose control of those things, the best way to reinforce it is with ice time, unfortunately. And I think very quickly you'll find that the message will be delivered, and again, it's, I guess that's a little bit of the transactional attitude to have, but it does work. Athletes, they want to play. That's why they're there. I think the other part of it is, trying to encourage better habits. And one of the things we found with our young players was that they weren't spending extra time in the gym. your schedule is very comprehensive and busy, but doing the minimum will not get you very far. It might help you sustain your career in the OHL, but it certainly won't help you extend. And every player I talk to at our level wants to play at a higher level, so you need to do more. And so one of the things we tried to do is have them journal their workouts and start charting them. And it became more of a competitive thing where our players were competing against each other to see who could do more. And they were holding each other accountable because of their competitive nature. I think all of our athletes are competitive by nature. If you can turn things into a competition and encourage the good things, players will start to do more of them. Video sessions, focusing on a positive as opposed to a negative, will reinforce the positive thing, which players want more of. They want to see themselves on that positive video. One of the things that I've heard of teams doing, is having heart rate monitors and then giving them the opportunity to see what their work rest ratio was and how much of their max they hit. I think in the age of data, there's so much information we have that you can use data as a positive tool for players to compete against themselves. And then the last part is, again, it's not for everybody. You have to understand who it's for and who it's not. But I think reading about those things, and learning from others' perspective and being able to relate to it and put it into context is always a really helpful resource.
Great information. Yeah, that's always a tough area, the whole accountability one. And Bob made a real good point. When you're dealing with players where outside of your exposure, they probably don't have a lot of accountability, be it home or school, but then you need it within the environment. It's always a tough one. I had a coaching colleague of mine present me with some interesting numbers a number of years ago. And he broke down the number of weeks every player has to their life in a week. It's 160 hours. 168 hours makes up a week. When you factor in from games and practice time, your exposure to those players, it's like 7-8% of their week. So you don't have a whole lot of time with them when you factor all the time they have with their peer group, school, parents. So it makes it even a little bit more difficult, trying to get that accountability from them with so little exposure. Tom, are you still on the line? You've got some good questions here for Wes, I see. Do we have Tom? No? Okay, I'll read them. If he unmutes and jumps in, he can cut me off. He opens up with great job, as always. What advice would you share for coaches that struggle to get the best out of a gifted player that just doesn't bring it consistently, despite being one of the most skilled athletes on your team?
It's an interesting question. I think number one is linguistic intentionality. What does bring it consistently mean? I think one of the things that I found as a coach is challenging the language that I use, because different things mean different things to other people. So when I say compete, an athlete may think I mean their effort, when really what I mean is their attention to detail, arriving to a puck first with their stick down, gaining inside body position. So being intentional with your language, specifically about what bring it means. I think, and this actually kind of lends into the accountability piece. If you make your expectations clear without any room for confusion, I think it will help bring clarity for your athlete about what the expectation is. One of the phrases that I like to use is standards over feelings. a lot of players, not just the talented ones, but a lot of players will allow their performance to be affected by how they feel as opposed to what the standard is. And so I think being abundantly clear with your language first will really help bring clarity for that athlete to bring it. The second piece is, I think I would want to learn more about just what it is that maybe is causing that inconsistency. I've coached a lot of athletes. There's one specifically I can think of right now that, was tremendously talented and couldn't seem to put it together on a consistent basis, like you said. The more I learned about them, the more I learned about some habits away from the arena that prevented them from being able to perform consistently. One of the most common ones for athletes now is their sleep. Sleep is nature's legal performance enhancing, thing to do. If you're not sleeping properly, you can't perform. And I know a lot of our athletes, even at the professional level, are up until 3, 4 a.m., playing video games, and they don't adequately give themselves time to recover and bring their best performance. And so, if there's probably something contributing to it. If they're older, it could be substance abuse. It could be trouble at home. It could be trouble with a romantic partner. There are a lot of things that can contribute to that. So I think, bringing it back to the relationship piece is learning more about what's going on in that athlete's life that's maybe preventing them from doing it. And sometimes all it takes is that person in their corner to learn more about them to help them break through that ceiling. So I think those two things are probably the best advice I could give.
Great advice. How do you guys foster players with different personalities or personality issues?
Well, we have our athletes take 2 very comprehensive behavioral assessments with a third-party behavioral analytics firm that provide us with multi-page reports on our athletes, ranging from information on their behavioral style to their motivating factors to communication do's and don'ts to what an ideal environment looks like for that athlete, to how they learn and process information, some of the competencies they've developed. It's a very expensive, obviously not a resource that's available to a lot of coaches. I certainly spend a lot of time reviewing that information. It is by no means, a comprehensive guide to building a relationship. There's still a human element that you kind of need to talk to them to see. But I think there are some free tools that are available that you can kind of, administer to your players to learn more about, their behavioral style or where they fall on a certain wheel in terms of how they learn. I think, getting that data and information is a useful tool. And then I think, trying to have a tailored approach to each athlete is a tricky balance. I mean, I think back even to when I first started coaching, there was far more generalistic view of how you communicated to your team. I think the most effective way of coaching is one-on-one. Even now, the most powerful meetings I have, the most impactful interactions are one-on-one. And I try and do 2 things. One is operate in that optimal zone where an athlete needs me to communicate to them how they need to be communicated to, but still challenging them from time to time by doing it outside of their comfort zone. Because the real world, you're going to have bosses that you don't like. You're going to have coworkers that don't communicate specifically to you. So trying to push them outside of their comfort zone to learn how to adequately deal with something that makes you uncomfortable is also, extremely important. So I think specifically it is individually tailoring our approach for each athlete, because as I mentioned, everyone's different. Their learning style is different. Their behavior is different. Their socioeconomic background is different. Their cultural profile is different. So I think individualizing that approach, which really, when you look at the research on Gen Z, they crave and thrive on having that individualism, want to be recognized for their individualism. So I think it's really important to tailor your approach.
Right. Can you share what the names of those behavior personality assessments are that you use?
Yeah, the company that we work with is called Core 5 Analytics. They're based out of Alberta. One of the key pieces of the assessment is the DISC assessment, DISC. I think there's some free DISC assessments you can find online. There are a lot of, the INTJ assessment is a pretty common one, or I forget what that's called, but there's a lot of different ones. If you look up behavioral assessments online, but Core 5 is the company we work with. The DISC wheel is something that I found useful. There's a lot of different ones out there.
Great, thank you. Well, that wraps up the questions. I don't see any more coming in. So Wes, thank you very much. This was fabulous. A lot of really good comments coming in from the coaches. They thoroughly enjoyed the information. It fits in really, really well with what Jeff and myself are trying to do with these webinars, and get a little bit outside the box and away from the typical X's and O's, and go down the path of sort of the outside the box thinking. And this was really good outside the box for a lot of the coaches, and a lot of the coaches really, really enjoyed it. So again, thanks so much for taking your time. Jeff, anything you want to chime in with, bud?
Yeah, no, that was perfect, Wes. Thank you. I appreciate that. I do request a song at the end of this, though. Karaoke night. I'm recorded for Can-Am, so we can show it next year. But yeah, no, that was great. We have DJ Smith from the Ottawa Sens coming up next week, next Wednesday night. The registration will be open either tomorrow or Thursday, again, on our social media and our website. But thanks a lot, Wes. That was great.
I appreciate you guys having me on. Like I said at the beginning, you're doing a great thing for the coaching community, and I'm honored to have been able to participate. As for the song, you can catch me on a Tuesday night at Cheers in St. Catharines once the regulations permit use of microphones in public. I don't think that's happening anytime soon, but you can catch me there.
I think I have a couple of videos if anyone wants.
Great stuff. Thanks again, Wes. And thank you again to all the coaches who took time out of their schedules to sit with us tonight. Based on the comments coming in, I know for certain that a lot of you took some really useful information away. So as always, until we see each other next week, stay safe and stay healthy. And we'll see you all again, hopefully next Wednesday for DJ. Good night. And thanks again, Wes.
Thanks.
Thanks a lot, guys.